that was a really empowering moment to be like, well, I don't care if I turn out a monster, then let it be, let it come. I will be the monster that I am, and I will still be happier than I am now.
Content warnings for this episode include misgendering. Genderful would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and unceded lands that the producers, hosts, and guests live and have dwelt upon. Today, we honor the Mohawk, Algonquin, and Anishinabewaki, and
Muiscas.
we honor the elders, the human, plant, and animal ancestors of these lands, and celebrate the living descendants of these peoples. May all beings tend these lands for the goodness of the next 7 generations and beyond. Howdy, folks. Welcome to Genderful, a talk show interviewing gender diverse folks about their special interests. Hi, I'm Miranda Katita, and my pronouns are she, her. The focus of our show is to interview trans, non-binary, agender, and gender diverse people regarding their special interests, passion projects, and resources for the gender diverse community. We want our audience to know that we hold multiple diverse identities and bring these lenses to the show with our passion for telling our stories. I identify as trans feminine, neurodivergent, queer, and a person of color residing in Canada. We invite you to remember that we are whole people with robust lives, friendships, challenges, and successes. We love and are loved, and we are delighted to share these stories with you. As always, we kindly remind our listeners that no person is the monolith of their identities. Your identities can change over time and are valid every step of the way. If you think you're gender diverse, you are gender diverse. There is no social or medical prerequisites to be included in the community. Welcome to Genderful, y'all. First pod of 2024. This is a show interviewing gender diverse people about their special interests. This week, our guest is Miles Borrero, he, they pronouns, and they are chatting with us about their memoir, which came out in last October of 2023, titled Beautiful Monster, A Becoming. So Miles was actually recommended as a guest by a previous guest that we had on the show, KB Brookins. So welcome to Genderful, Miles. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Miranda. It's so amazing to be here with you.
Yeah, likewise. So let's jump right into the interview. By the way, y'all should check out this book. I took a quick look through it. It looks very interesting. Hopefully, when I get the chance to read things again, which it's been quite some time since I've been able to read, it's sitting there on my pile of books to read. So,
You
so
can also
we have a
listen
couple
to it.
questions. I'm sorry.
You can also listen to it if you want.
Yes, there is an
Fortunately,
audiobook
so
version
that's
as
yeah.
well. So we have a couple questions that we like to ask all of our guests. The first one is, what might be the things you can trace back to your youth that indicated you might be gender diverse one day?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I don't think I'm super in love with the term gender diverse because I think that it assumes that the gender binary is sort of the standard or something. But I definitely think that I've known my whole life that I was different, and that I fit somewhere more in the gray area between the binaries. Since I was really, really little, I didn't really have a way to articulate it for myself, for
Mm,
sure. I think that the words weren't there. I grew up in Colombia, South America during the Pablo Escobar years, during the
mm,
80s and 90s. And we're a deeply Catholic country.
mhm,
And so I think and the gender binary here is very, very marked. So it was not hard for me to feel like I lived somewhere outside of those two boxes. Um, Yeah, so I think I knew very early on, in the sense that I felt like I was a boy when I was very little, and then I think my trajectory was that then I sort of had to, in order to survive and exist, I basically uh, performed femininity for many, many years,
mm,
and then at the like well, I really started my transition around the age at 40, but before that, I think 10 years before that, I had started to, uh, in a very slow and gradual way, uh, I started to shirk the responsibility of having to perform femininity,
Mm.
and started finding little ways um, of finding other ways of being within that, but they were very, very. I think for me, it was like a very slow build into realizing what was actually happening and how I could relate to my gender differently. So it really took me a long time to figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's very personally relatable. So we're
Oh,
probably
really?
very close in age. I mean, I also grew up in the 80s. And I also, so I started transitioning in my late 30s. And
Yeah.
yeah, like when you said it's like even before you kind of figure it out, you start kind of you stop performing a little. Because like for me, so I mean,
Yes.
like I was assigned male at birth, and I very much like my masculinity was a performance. I was performing my gender.
Mm.
But over time, I kind of stopped performing and started like, slowly introducing a little bit of femininity here and there. It's like I'm going to start wearing pink polo shirts, and you can't stop me.
I love that. Yeah, totally. I think it's
Yeah.
more that, right? When you don't have
Hmm.
words, you really or like since I didn't have words and there wasn't really a whole lot of representation when we were growing up,
Hmm.
it was no man's it was kind of like no person's land, like you had to kind of uh walk through the forest and start, like making a path for yourself. And I
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
I can really relate to that idea of, instead of, it was less of a forthright coming out into the wilderness, but it was more of a, I'm going to let go of this now, and I'm going to let go of that now, and I'm going to stop doing that because I never really loved that, and I feel like now I can, And so for me, it was very similar. It was like I gave up,
Mhm.
like at first it was I grew up in Latin America, and the standards here of femininity are very I would say heightened and intensified.
Yes.
And so, for
Yes.
example, like I never had access to I mean, we're gonna go right into it. Underwear, the underwear here is bananas. It's like it's
Mm.
very women's underwear is very specific and very sexy. And so as I was growing up and I was as a teenager, I could never find comfortable underwear. So first it was kind of like and I think, I don't know if you remember American Apparel, that brand.
Yes.
They had like the boyfriend underpants or something that were
Mm.
kind of almost like boys' underwear. And so at first it was kind of like, well, I'm gonna let go of that and I'm gonna wear boyfriend underpants, and and it was like little things like that, like then I'd start I'd venture into the men's side of the store and
Mm.
things like that. But that all happened really like slowly over time. I kind of shed the layers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely so I that's another thing I really relate to because I mean, I grew up at so I grew up in a very like religious Muslim household. And
Mhm.
in Muslim culture, the sexes are very segregated. Like they're like
Yes.
you there's basically no separation at all between men and they're like men and women are completely separated. And yeah, like in the time that we grew up, there wasn't really a lot of great representation in media. So like, I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't even know what a trans person was until my 20s. So like,
I think I didn't really know. I mean,
yeah.
I think I knew because I had seen when I was growing up, Columbia used to get a lot of really wonderful world cinema. And so I remember The Crying Game coming out
Mhm.
when I was young, probably like 14. And so I kind of knew, but I kind of didn't like I couldn't it, I knew and I didn't really take issue with any of it, but I couldn't quite process it. And so I
Mhm.
feel like my first sort of obvious trans experience when I was um, seeing someone who was trans was Boys Don't Cry. And still, I couldn't quite understand what was happening. And I think I was
Mhm.
probably in my mid 20s then. And then after that, um, it really, it, I think I was probably in my mid 30s when I finally sort of started to get it. I was like, oh, there's, like this is a whole different world,
Hmm.
and it's an opening. But I think it took me, I don't know, culturally, and what I think the way that we're raised is so deeply ingrained in us that
Hmm.
you have to chip away at those, or I had to chip away at those layers for a long, long time before I could actually uh, kind of see what I was looking at, which is
Yeah.
a really weird thing, to
Yeah. And that's, yeah,
see
like
things but not
I
really
totally
understand what
get
they
that.
are.
I totally get that. And it's something like, I've joked about it. It's like, people crack their trans eggs. So it's like, you're picturing like a chicken egg. It's like my egg was an ostrich egg that had an inch thick shell that I needed
Totally.
power tools and several decades.
You need like one of those things that
Yeah.
the that break the
So-
road up. Yeah, totally. A drill. Yeah.
now we all
I
know
was
that
like that
like,
too.
yeah, so our relationship to gender is not, it's not a linear process. So it's, it's not point A to point B to point C. Sometimes we go from point A
Totally.
to point Q to point alpha. So
Totally. Totally.
how would you say your relationship to gender has evolved over time?
I would say that uh at this point in my life, I'm not really that interested in gender, meaning that
Mm,
I I I feel like freedom and the space to express myself is more important to me than actually uh fitting into some sort of box. I think for a while I had to the process was, I mean, I think in choosing to transition in the way that I did, I had to sort of embrace the male gender to a certain degree in order to allow myself to expand my masculinity. Um, but that stopped being, but it was never about becoming a man or becoming male necessarily. It was just that I needed more space for expression.
mm,
And now that I'm like further along in my transition, and that I'm sort of more grounded in this body and like what I'm doing, I feel like I don't know. I just don't feel like gender in itself is that interesting, of a thing. Like I feel
mm.
like it's useful, obviously, to it's a shorthand, but I feel like gender is so intimate and so expansive, and uh, like for example, I'll give you an example. Like I when I was in my when I was around 19, I fell in love with my first woman, with my first girlfriend. And then that process of coming out of the closet of sort of realizing that I was queer and all these things. And now I feel a lot more open to all kinds of people. But I think that, and all kinds of genders. And I think that that has to do with me coming to a place where I feel really good, and so it's almost like the boxes and the labels. I do think the labels are super important to some degree in order for us to find our communities and all that, but the labels themselves for me don't really hold the um they're markers,
Yeah.
more than landing strips. So yeah, I feel like I'm just a lot more fluid with all of it than I used to be. But I think part of that's because I'm not as stressed out. I think when I before I had even begun my transition, there was just such an amount of stress and anxiety that went along with that, and a lot of energy to upkeep sort of those facades. And as I started chipping away at those facades, I just feel so much better inside myself that I'm just much more open and available for whatever anybody wants to propose and bring, which is really like a lovely feeling.
Yeah, no, I love that for you. That's such a great way of looking at it. And
Mhm.
so when we're talking about these, boxes and labels, I mean, I think it's important to remember that they can be useful for a lot of us, but
Of
we
course.
kind of have to like keep in mind that they are descriptive and not prescriptive. So, I mean, just because you fall into a certain box, it doesn't mean you have to be that way. It's just a useful tool to help describe, your own experiences. It's so, but yeah, no, I mean, for like personally, like a lot of it was just kind of like shedding all those layers of masculinity and then figuring out what was left and what I wanted to be.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Do
So
you
when you
feel
shed kind of society's expectations, then you go out and you figure out it's like, well, who do I want to be?
totally? Do you feel like there's any masculinity? Like, do you feel like within the shedding that there was a kind of masculinity that you maintain that did feel like you and that did feel yours, or do you feel like you really like let go of all of it? I'm just curious.
So I think there's still some of it left. Excuse
Mm-hmm.
me. So definitely my desire to, protect others.
Mm,
So like being socialized as a male, you have this expectation of being able to do violence at a moment's notice.
mm,
And I let go of a lot of that, but there's still that like, there's still that like part of me that's like, if you come after like someone I care about, like you're gonna, if you
yeah,
mess around, you're gonna find out.
yeah.
So I think that's something that's kind of like still there, but I've tried to turn it into like a positive sense, like, because our community is under attack. It is we are under threat, and
Yeah,
we need our guardians. We need people who are going to
totally.
be out there to like fight for us, both like, with words and with action. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm still doing my weight training. I'm like full on muscle mommy here. So
Nice, nice. Well, I was just asking because I feel like I'm much more comfortable with my own femininity now,
Mhm.
than I used to be. It feels like it bubbles up and over, and I feel good about that because uh, I don't feel like those two poles of me are at odds anymore, and I feel like on any given day they can kind of sway and play and dance with each other in a much more like with more grace than they used to be able to.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, definitely like early on in my transition, it was something that's I wanted to get away from anything that like was masculine. I want to just
Mm,
get me as far, like on the other side of the planet. Just like no,
yeah.
I don't want any part of that. But I've kind of relaxed that a little bit now that I'm
Mm,
further along in my transition and I'm a bit more secure with myself. So I mean, I still feel very feminine. I feel like I
mhm.
have a lot of feminine energy, but there's
Yeah.
still a nugget of masculinity
Yeah.
in there somewhere. So.
I mean, I love, the conversations with people because everybody experiences it so differently too that I really appreciate. Just there's so much variety and so much of the spectrum, that it's quite
Mhm.
wonderful and magical to kind of see
Mhm.
where people like how people experience their own skin and how people experience their own lived experience.
Mhm. Absolutely. Why don't we talk about your book?
Let's do it.
So what inspired you to write your memoir, titled Beautiful Monster of Becoming?
I brought a little copy of it here so that you can see
Oh, there it is.
yeah. Um, well, I'm a yoga teacher by trade. I've taught yoga now for 18 years, and I I started a project maybe 13 years ago where I wanted to do something playful and expressive, so I wanted to write. And I started writing a blog for my students, basically, that I would kind of send out once a month. I promised myself I would do it once a month, and I would send it out to my students. And it was because yoga philosophy sometimes feels so unattainable. I thought it would be interesting to have my experience of how the philosophy actually meets my life. So some of the stories were funny, some of the stories were it was whatever was going on basically, and I would and whatever I was thinking about in terms of the yoga philosophy. And so I started writing that blog once a month, and my students kept saying, "Oh, your writing is really interesting. It's really good. We really enjoy reading it, and you should write something." And then about 6 years ago, I went through a hardcore breakup. And
Mm,
when you here in Colombia, we say atusa when your heart is just totally like in a knot.
mhm,
And I had a lot of time on my hands, and it also coincided with my dad's, or it was right after my dad's passing. And so I was just grieving, I think, a lot, and I started considering compiling some of these essays that I had written for my students and maybe making like a little book of essays of how philosophy kind of meets the life. And when I started looking at it, I realized that the story that really wanted to be told was different. I felt at the time, and this was only 6 years ago, I felt like there was such little information and knowledge about the trans community. Um, and and I felt like I had very little knowledge about us, and I was already starting to to really understand that I was part of the community. And I also felt, I don't know, I would get a lot of questions from my students about this, that, and the other. And then, as the 6 years that took me to write the book and to put it out passed, it became very clear that politically we were being chosen as scapegoats for a bunch of things. That there's a lot of mis and disinformation about us out there, and also that our community really suffers from a lot of violence. You
Yeah.
know, and I wanted to put a story out that didn't have a horrible ending. I wanted, or at least to the end of this book, has not had a horrible ending, and to I wanted to to tell my story in a way that was so universal that anybody could relate to it, but there was also a trans story and that was honest, with the difficulties and the challenges of being trans, but that also could appreciate the beauty and the magic of what we offer. And I've had a really wild life. I grew up, uh, in Colombia while there were bombs going off,
Yeah.
and it was pretty wild here. And then I've done a lot of different things. Like I've really I'm kind of I'm a very intense personality. So when I go
Mhm.
after something, I go for it deeply. So I was a hardcore horseback rider for a long time. Like I rode for 18 years, almost every day except for Mondays. Then I became an actor, and I did that for 14 years, really intensely. And then since then I've become a yoga teacher. So I felt like there was a lot uh, of just interesting little nuggets of lived experience. I think that being an immigrant, also, I don't feel like there are a lot of Latinx voices that I know of that are out there,
Mhm.
that are, kind of loud and proud or queer. So I felt like the all of the things that I was perhaps a voice that we were lacking, and that I could offer something that might allow people that are younger than myself and people that are older than myself and people that are cis and people some understanding, and also like some reverb, some like, oh, I felt that too. um yeah, so I wanted to write the book as a prayer and as a sort of balm for our community, and I also
Yeah.
wanted to write the book as a kind of a soft challenge and dare to allies and to cis het people to expand expand their awareness and their ability to kind of acknowledge and take in otherness, their the otherness compared to them.
Mhm.
That was important to me. Like I wanted a cis person to be able to pick up the book and realize that I want the same things they do in a lot of ways. And I know that we're very different, like our communities. I wanted also to celebrate our differences, but I really wanted anybody, like a young person, an old person, to be able to pick up this book and be like, I've had love, I've had heartbreak, I've had tough situations that I've not known how to navigate myself out of. I've had deaths in my family. I've, because I feel like ultimately our humanity is broader than the things that make us different, and our differences are what make us, if we want to acknowledge our differences, they are what can make us really, really amazing. The acknowledging of those differences and the uplifting of those differences. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. And I completely agree. Something that I talk about quite a lot is the value of art therapy. So, whether you're
Mm.
writing a book or you're painting a picture, or in my case, you're making videos.
Yeah.
It's kind of a way of like working through your own stuff, but also, kind of paying it forward to the next generation. Because, like, I mean, our generation, we didn't grow up with a lot of information about trans people. We didn't grow up with a lot of other trans stories, or getting to learn about other trans experiences. So that's kind of, my gift to the younger people is
Hmm.
sharing my own stories, and maybe that'll help them with their maybe things. Maybe they won't have had things as tough as we did.
Oh my gosh. I mean, we
Yes.
we had no representation. So I feel
Hmm.
like feeling seen or feeling acknowledged or feeling that reverb of like, oh, I've been in that situation, I think is so powerful. And it was so lonely for me for so long,
Yeah.
with my transition and with my queerness, that I really I really just wanted to put something out that maybe, you know, maybe it would reach one or two people and would help them not feel so lonely.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. And I know personally, like, seeing other people's stories, that helped me a lot with my transition. It's like, when I first started exploring my gender, it's like, this is how much of a nerd I am. I go on Google, it's like, how do you know if you're trans?
Right.
And I started, watching other stories from other trans people, and it's hard for me to overstate the impact that had on me. And I wish that we had these resources when we were growing up. uh,
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
also think that the giving value to our story, the fact, like, acknowledging that our stories matter is very empowering,
Mhm.
because it if our stories matter, then it means that we matter, and
Yes.
it's kind of an acknowledgement that we exist, and that we exist, that our worth is intact just by existing.
Yes.
And I think that
Mhm.
that's something that I've grown up in a world that says the opposite,
Mhm.
that says that everything that I am is negative. But I think through writing the book, I am claiming my own worthiness, and I am claiming all of my readers' worthiness, and I do think that it might be like an insight change that feels very small, but it's on a cellular level, I think it's profound.
Yes. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I mean, but even now, like, we live in a world that tells us that our lives don't have value, and
Right.
that we don't matter. And it's a brave thing to do, to, like, put your foot down and say, no, we do matter. I matter.
Right.
So,
Right. And I also, another
yeah.
thing of, writing it is that, I think it's also like, yo, I'm smart, like we are fierce. We've had to become better at whatever we're doing. We've had to be more we've had to become better informed, more educated, more amazing, in order to be able um to exist this far. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I also feel like it's sort of like a like acknowledge me, I'm right here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, your book has a bit of an interesting title. Can you tell us about the reasoning behind the title of Beautiful Monster?
Yes. Um, I really, so if you were to look at you probably can't see it very well here, but the the title is kind of laid on almost like a piece of paper, and then there's a Polaroid, and the paper is creased, so it almost feels like the monster has a line going through it.
Mm,
Um, I mean, I think queerness has always, I don't know. I feel like the queer community has a fascination with monsters. I feel like we have been called and thought of as monsters historically. I feel like there's also a power in monsters. There's a kind of mythology
Hmm.
and superpower in the monstrous, you know, and there's something perverted and amazing about it that that I kind of love and grapple with. And the beautiful monster was I feel like there are all these wonderful creatures in nature, that are maybe not what you think of as beautiful. Um, and they're
Mm.
beautiful, but they're these odd sort of, I'm thinking of like things in the ocean and
Yes.
like there are all these creatures that are kind of like you don't know what to do with them, and but their beauty is undeniable, like if you look at a spider close up, like they have like their eyes glare, they have like a shine, and they have nature's just so full of detail and stuff. And I love this idea that we are um that if the world sees us as monstrous, there is still beauty there, you know?
Hmm.
And when I was transitioning, I was, or during the beginning of my physical transition, I found it terrifying because I had been told all my life, or sort of like not told verbally, but told through media, told through
Yes.
news, told through that I was going to become monstrous. And the moment that I decided to proceed with my transition was a moment where I had to really, it was a moment where I had to make a decision and a choice that even if the answer was monstrous, it was what I needed. And that maybe being monstrous isn't that bad, So I had
Mm.
to kind of commit to my own mythology and commit to my own monster. Um, and that was a really empowering moment to be like, well, I don't care if if I turn out a monster, then let it be, let it come, but I will be the monster that I am, and I will still be happier than I am now, you
Oh, that's
know?
beautiful.
So I kind of love the play of I think it's also like testing the reader, it's kind of like, well, hi, like are you it's like a challenge. It's like, do you want to open the door and see what's in here? Let's go. you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and speaking of the artwork of the cover of the book, I wanted to draw attention to the Polaroid itself. So there's a little bit of a drawing. So for those of you who are listening in the future, there's a drawing of devil horns and angel wings. So can you tell us a little bit about the symbolism there?
sure. So the Polaroid was taken by my dad. It's a Polaroid of me when I was probably like 8 years old. And the Polaroid is kind of sitting on a piece of paper, sort of like a bluish piece of paper. And we there's some mythology in the book. The book is sort of woven in with some Indian mythology,
Mm,
um, or some Indian mythological stories. Only a few of them that I really love. And so I wanted I wanted there to be a nod toward the mythical and toward the magical, um, and mystical probably in there too. And I also wanted it to be I'm a product of the 80s, so there's something like very street that I love, the sort of Converse hitting the pavement and
mm.
chewing gum stuck to the bottom of the chair and whatever, that kind of like 80s vibe that we grew up in.
Yeah, even Polaroids
So
themselves are very much
Polaroids,
it's a very narrow slice of history where Polaroids were a thing. It was
yes,
like they were cheap enough to mass produce, but they were before the age of the digital camera.
exactly. And they
Yes.
were quick. Like it was the one time that you could take a picture and you could see it right then and
Mhm.
there, right? So we thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to kind of draw something on the Polaroid? but then we realized that if we pulled the drawing out of the Polaroid, it kind of also was like kind of mythical. And then
Hmm.
we tried different things. Like I tried putting a mermaid tail on the Polaroid and like a unicorn horn. We tried like a mustache and different things. And then it just seemed like with the title, um, that's kind of testing the way that the people that were portrayed in the media. Um, the clearest thing was the devil horns and the kind of angel wings. It's like beautiful monster. Is this a monster? Is it not a monster? Like is this person a monster? Are they not a monster? Like uh you decide, you know?
Yeah.
So I felt like it distilled also because when you take things and you make them, are they good or are they evil? That's also a way of really oversimplifying something, right? Like we are all capable of all the things. Like
Hmm.
you were saying, like if someone comes after someone that you love, you're capable of rage and of
Mm.
protecting them, and so it's kind of also like I think it poses like a nice question for the reader. Like, where do you land on this subject, like after reading this book or as you open the pages to this book?
Hmm. Now, earlier you mentioned that you were a very serious horseback rider, and
Yes.
horses play a very large role in your book and in your journey. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think the first time I felt really seen was by a horse.
Oh,
Um, and I I don't know that I would have survived my younger years without horseback riding. Horseback riding was I went to a what do you call those, like schools where people wear sports coats.
private schools
Well, yes, like a private
or
school, but it
boarding
was a very
school?
kind of like it wasn't a boarding school. It was a
Okay.
private school, but it was very it was geared, it was in Bogota, but it was geared toward everybody going to an Ivy League. So it was a prep school.
Oh, prep school. Yeah, yeah.
And the environment in the school was harsh, you know. Um, oh, thank you. Somebody said they love the cover design. I appreciate you. um, but so the prep school, and I think there wasn't a lot of arts were not really fostered, and so there weren't a lot of outlets for me. So I think that horseback riding kind of became my sanctuary and my shelter. And when you are in relationship to a horse, horses are really, it's all about breath and energy. There's not a whole lot of speaking or
Mhm.
and you are relating. I don't know, like I don't know if you have any pets, but I have dogs, and I've had cats before, and I feel like animals are just such amazing teachers
Mm.
because there is so much. A lot of it happens in silence, at least without words, and through breath and little grunts and little gestures, and you learn to read their eyes. And I feel like Merlin, my first horse, really was able to, like, I felt really seen by him, and so I feel like he really taught me um a kind of being inside myself that had steadiness that I didn't get anywhere else. And I feel like that steadiness really, after I stopped horseback riding at 18 when I went to college in the US, I feel like that really was something that I was able to take with me. And I feel like that's one of the few things that I can really pinpoint to that has gotten me here, you know, that I really
Mhm.
needed. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's I feel the same way about animals. So I mean, I didn't grow up around horses, but um, just I love everyone else's pets. I don't have my own pets, but I love other people's
Uh-huh.
pets.
You're an auntie to lots of pets.
Yeah, yeah, but it's just kind of it's like whenever I go to a gathering or a party or anything like that, I look for the if there's an animal, I'll look for the animal and just ignore all the humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
it's
that's
just I don't know, animals have this like strange wisdom about them where they can sense your emotions,
Mhm.
and they kind of always gravitate to the person that kind of needs them the most.
Yeah.
um and that's something I really resonate with. Like it's and like each animal has its own kind of different personality and different ways of responding to people. And I don't know, I could talk about animals all day, so
I know they have a dignity and an elegance that's so
Mhm.
built in, you know, it's really amazing to me. Like I feel like I just learn so much from them constantly whenever I'm near them, and I just feel so grateful to what they I don't know, there's also like a softness there. Like even when they're a little feisty like cats or whatever, there's still
Yeah, yeah.
there's a smoothness or a softness that comes with them that maybe I don't feel like I have so readily. So it's something that I can really kind of absorb.
So we talked about this a little bit briefly before. So let's talk about Colombia. So you mentioned before you grew up during the Pablo Escobar years. So for those of you who maybe need a little bit of a history lesson, so Pablo Escobar was a very big drug person. So there was a lot of violence in Colombia during those years. There was a lot of drug wars, and it was pretty dark times. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about growing up in that environment?
I think it probably was extended over 12 or 15 years. And Pablo Escobar, his thing was that he was trying to become um, sanctioned politically, like he was trying to infiltrate the government
Hmm.
so that he could, sort of similar to what happened in Cuba, so that he could basically use the country of Colombia to to continue to build his fortune and make laws that benefited him. Um, I mean, very similar to other people we might know, or
Yeah,
might have heard of in the last few years,
yeah, yeah.
and this year. And but it brought on a time that was extremely violent. So I grew up with bombs going off and people getting kidnapped and people getting shot and murdered. And one of the things that Escobar did was that he had this theory that the way to control the population was to terrorize them. So a lot of his acts were random because he
Hmm.
didn't he just thought if he blew something up here and then blew something up there, it would keep people basically traumatized.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so it was a very intense experience, one that I don't even think I started to unpack until I was writing the book. Um, because or for me, living in a situation like that, um, there's something that happens where I learned to live every day as my last.
Hmm.
Um, and just because there was all this violence and terrorism going on doesn't mean that we didn't have a great time. I had a very rich life growing up, and we had a lot of fun and we partied super hard.
Yeah.
And but I think that was also a product of the fact that you never knew if you were going to come home. So it set up a kind of interesting dynamic for me. Uh, and I realized years later that my nervous system was kind of fried from all of those things. Um, yeah, but it was just a fascinating backdrop to grow up in, uh, and try to maneuver around. And the country when I lived here was kind of falling apart. You know, like the
Hmm.
Supreme Court was bombed, and a lot of the Supreme Court judges were murdered, and um, then it wasn't just that Escobar existed, but there were also the guerrilla were like the paramilitary, and there were struggles between the two of them, the
Yeah, yeah.
cartel and the guerrilla. So it was literally living in a war zone.
Yeah,
And but I think that's shaped me in a lot of ways, because
absolutely.
I think it was an invaluable experience because I can really have a lot of empathy and sort of like a I don't know, like I feel, you know, I mean, with the wars that are happening right now in Ukraine and Israel and all
Hmm.
the things, um, I just really feel for anybody who lives in a war zone, and I think it also has made me such a pacifist. You know,
Yeah,
like I don't believe that war is the answer, and I also feel like we, as most of us as humans, um, I think have understood in some at some point that it doesn't get us anywhere, So I think we're living in an interesting time right now where there's all this friction and like, do we fight, do we not fight? And it's an interesting question.
yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, like you said, there is a lot of conflict in the world these days, and it's something that I'm very personally affected by, as
Of
someone
course,
who's of
totally.
Arabic descent. And it's tough, but like the situation in Colombia, like um it's it's absolutely wild. It's absolutely wild what happens. I mean, if for those of you listening who are maybe not familiar with the situation, like do a deep dive on Wikipedia. I don't know if you have an opinion on the show Narcos, but I learned quite a lot about those years from that show. Um,
So I would say Narcos is a very Hollywoodized version of
yes,
what
I
happened,
would assume
but
that it's very dramatized.
there is a wonderful actually show called Escobar, just titled Escobar,
Mhm.
that's in Spanish and it has subtitles. And actually, one of my friends growing up plays Escobar in that show.
Oh
But
wow.
that show is a wonderful, wonderful. If you're a history buff or are interested in that time period at all, that show is really like a great show that really, I think the story is fascinating enough. You don't have to Hollywoodize it at all.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
really shows the story as is over um without kind of putting him on a pedestal, but also acknowledging that he was quite brilliant and quite savage, like
Mhm.
in his ways, in the way that he fought his wars. And so I think that it really it shows him as dangerous as he was.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and he was very oddly very popular in his time, like because he really threw his money around with the common people, and
Well,
so yeah.
he put a lot of money into the population, and
Hmm.
so the population grew to love him and would protect him. That's how he stayed
Hmm.
protected, was he basically, helped the poor. And yeah, so it was a really complex situation. And it's still, if you go to Medellin today, which I do a retreat near Medellin like once a year in the
Hmm.
the Pacific Coast, but we start off in Medellin. Um, if you go down to Medellin, you'll see that there still is a lot of there still are very conflicting views
Yeah.
of Escobar today in Medellin. Some people will be like, don't come and idolize him, and other people still idolize him. And yeah, he was a very uh polarizing
Yes.
uh figure, you know.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I want to touch upon was just like this is just like one of these things that like you think that they'd made this up for the show, but this actually like is real, is the cocaine hippos.
Oh my
Which
gosh,
are
which
apparently still a menace in Colombia, these like to
they're
this day.
running ramp, they've
Yes.
procreated, and now nobody can stop them, and people are terrified of them because they go after people.
Oh yeah, hippos are terrifying creatures. Like
Yeah.
that, it is the last animal in the world that you want to make angry.
Yeah, and now they're in the equator, which they're not animals from these lands, and they're these giant animals, and so they run through the forest and trample everything. I mean, it's
Hmm.
become a huge problem, and there's like a whole herd of them that I think there's something like 200 hippos that they've just kept procreating and procreating, and they've
Yeah.
created yeah, it's
Yeah. Like
wild.
they've become a full-on invasive species. Like
Yeah,
it's
and that's because
absolutely
he
wild.
brought them. He had a zoo in his house, and he had all kinds of exotic creatures and brought
Hmm.
the hippos, and now there's this huge problem.
Hmm. So let's get right back into the book. So we chatted about a little about this a little bit earlier, but one of the overarching themes of the book is that of playing roles. So you're playing femininity, playing certain roles within the family, playing roles in the theater. How does that thread extend to being Latinx in some way?
Yeah, I feel like specifically being Latinx in the States is I feel like we are I don't know how you feel. Um I feel like we are a little bit unseen.
Mm,
Um and and because I oftentimes I can read as white. Bless you. Um
I was
I
muted. So.
feel well, I know, but still. Um
Nobody saw
uh,
it. No.
oh yeah. But I feel like that there's I don't know, there's something of like we're ignored or not
Mm,
seen or not uh and I think because I read sometimes I can be read as white, uh people can forget, but I don't forget,
yes.
and it's a really it's I I'm just very aware of the privilege that that brings.
Mm,
Um, and I just feel like uh, I don't know. I guess I was asking you how you feel because I feel like we're in a similar minority that's like sort of. Um, I mean, I guess Latin. I guess I was thinking of myself as a Colombian, which is like a very small
mm,
country. Like
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
a very small minority even within the Latin community. But I just feel like we aren't really acknowledged, and when we're acknowledged it's only in the light of being of service to somebody else you know
Hmm.
and that has been tricky. I think it's been challenging to be seen as anything other than that sometimes, even with my students whom I love, but there can sometimes be like an edge of like, oh well, you're of service to me, like you're serving me, uh
Hmm.
and that can be uncomfortable for me, but I definitely always I feel yeah, I feel that we're not the top dogs, and that's just kind of which I have no interest in necessarily being a top dog. I don't want to top anything. I just kind of
Yeah.
I simply want to be sort of sharing the landscape, but I do think that that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying about kind of being that invisible minority, or you're only seen when you're suiting someone's agenda, and
When you're
also
of
with the
use.
whole, yeah, your value is only in how you can serve the kind of the ruling class, or
Right.
the non-marginalized people of society. And there's something else that you said that I also kind of relate to, is the whole like light skin privilege. So, being able to pass as white
Mm-hmm.
is something that I've been able to do, because for those of you who can't see me, I have fair skin, so I'm able to pass as white, but that the jig is up when I have to present my ID for whatever reason, and then they see my name. So I'm
Right.
sure that you get the same sort of thing. It's like, oh, you're not one of us. So it's like,
Yes.
yeah.
And I feel like I get it from both sides because
Hmm.
even though I grew up in South America, my English is very good, and so and my accent is I think it's a little more pronounced right now because I've been in South America for 3 weeks, but I generally have no accent, and so I think that from the other side, for example, if I go into a bodega and it's owned by Latins, if I speak Spanish or address them in Spanish, it blows their minds. It's like they can't hear it or understand it, and
Yeah.
they'll only speak to me in English, which is also, so I feel like I'm kind of in this place where I don't fit in either or.
Yeah.
I'm sort of I'm a hardcore in betweener. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
like I've
Same.
always I just kind of like, I think that's part of my trans identity. I think that's part of just who I am, and the way that for whatever reason I've sort of landed in the world. I always am straddling at least two poles, and
Hmm.
I don't know. It's an interesting place to be, because sometimes I can uh because of that, I can kind of glide into spaces that other people can't. And
Hmm.
sometimes because of that, I'm also like not allowed in other spaces that people can inhabit. So it's a really interesting, it's a wild place to exist in, but I like it. I mean, I think it's very, I don't know, it's part of my karma, I guess. So I feel kind of at home there, but it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just like I very much relate to the whole being kind of torn between two worlds because like, I mean, I grew up in Canada, but like my parents are first generation immigrants. So it's you know, I if you didn't know any better, it's like I'm just like any other North American person, but like it's I
Yeah,
have certain signifiers that mark me as different. But then if I was to go back to the old country, they would see me as a Westerner because
right.
like I don't really speak the language that well. I don't understand the customs that well. So it's just like everywhere I kind of I see myself as the stranger. Everywhere I go, I am the stranger.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that way too. It's funny, a bunch of
Hmm.
I'm noticing on the chat that hardcore in betweener was a favorite there, and I think it's also a good name for a band, y'all. Yeah,
Yes,
totally.
yes,
Somebody put it in there.
I agree. And there was another thing I wanted to touch on. So the very term Latinx is a term that kind of gets a lot of pushback within the Latina community, is because it's not a word that you can say in Spanish. So I don't know if you had any
Hmm.
personal thoughts on that. I mean, I'm sure there's a wide variety of opinions on that, but I'm interested in hearing your opinion on it.
I like it. I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling either or. I don't really like the term Hispanic.
Mm,
It just feels cynical in a way that's, I don't know, not that lovely to my ears. And Latin is great too. Uh, I mean, I get I see what the frustration is with Latinx, but I think it's kind of cute, like I think it's sort
mhm.
of, I think I find it to be a little bit playful and nodding toward queerness or toward a more expansive way of being. So I appreciate that about it. So I guess that's maybe why I've started, or why I use it. But I guess I haven't spent that much time thinking about it.
That's
Uh,
perfectly fair because I know that there is it is a controversial term and not everyone likes it. And like I said, there's a wide variety of opinions. So I don't want to like have you speak for everyone. This is just your own personal opinion, right? So
yeah,
and kind of everyone's opinions are valid to some extent. So I'm always curious to hear about it because it's not, I mean, it's not my lived experience. It's not my communities. So like I always want to make sure I'm using like the right terms for people.
yeah.
So
I appreciate that. But as a hardcore in betweener, I guess
yeah.
I've always been someone who has I have used labels, but I've also had a strong resistance to labels. I don't really love labeling myself. But I understand the need for them. So I also
Mhm.
I think that Latinx fits into that mindset where it's like I'll use it as a shorthand, but I don't necessarily feel like it defines me, or
Right,
it's just a way to start the conversation. It's not like the end of the conversation.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I use the term queer because like queer is a very nebulous term. It can mean a lot of different
Mhm.
things. So, I
Yes.
just say that I'm queer. And then if you want to know what I actually mean by that, then you have to ask additional questions.
Absolutely. And that's what I love about queer too, that it's kind of
Yes.
open-ended. It's like, you know,
Hmm. Hmm. So speaking of kind of being like a hardcore in-betweener, what would you say is the cumulative effect of living on the outskirts of what society chooses to acknowledge as quote unquote legitimate, as both as an immigrant or as a queer person or as, a gender outlaw, as we like to call ourselves sometimes?
Hmm. I'm sorry. Can you just repeat that question?
Oh
Sorry, I
yeah,
got a
so like
little.
it's kind of like what's the cumulative effect of all those things is kind of being
Hmm.
like as it being an in-betweener, both like um as as you're being as an immigrant, so living in the United States as
Right.
someone who's Latinx, or living in Colombia, someone who spent a great deal of time in the United States, and as a queer person and as someone who is kind of outside the gender norms.
Got you. Yeah. Uh, I I think it's made me realize that home. I've really um I think it's strengthened the understanding that coming home to myself is the most important thing. So that wherever I go, I can feel at home because I'm at home with myself. Because
Mhm.
I've never really fit, I think it's created this not permanent, but this constant situation where I feel like I don't belong here or there. I'm not
Yeah.
of that or of that. I'm not, like I don't. I'm always in between, and so I think it's almost like it's really shaped who I am, and it's shaped my ability to stand in my own backbone and understand that is enough. That I can just be me and come home to myself. So I'll always have like a place, a soft landing place. Um, yes, but I think it definitely. I mean, like you're someone who sort of, as you were saying, kind of identifies that with that a little bit too,
Mhm.
and I'd be interested to hear your experience. But for me, I do think that it's sort of like it's such a big part of who I am and how I
Yeah.
function in the world, and it also it's such a big part of how I relate to other people and the world, the space of in-betweenness, that I have
Mhm.
a very large uh, I have a soft place for those of us who are in that space.
Yeah, yeah. So these sorts of in-between spaces, they're called liminal spaces. And there's something very queer about liminal spaces. So you can actually, one of my YouTube colleagues has a whole video about this. But yeah, it's that in-betweenness, that being in that liminal space of not really belonging anywhere. And I think this is something that's um pretty much everyone I've ever talked to that is an immigrant themselves, or is the child of immigrants, relates to this, because you're living in one place while not really being from there, and your quote unquote home, or where you came from, is you're also not welcome there. So it's
Mhm.
you kind of have to carve out your own place. So it's, if everywhere you go is somewhere that you don't belong, then you have to make your own place where you belong. Um,
I feel like it's made me more sure-footed because uh, I've I trust myself. Sometimes I feel like more than other people who don't feel that in betweenness. Um, because I've had to trust myself my whole life with that. I've been navigating that for so long that it also creates like a really, and I think yoga has really helped me with this also
mm,
too, is creating a sense of confidence and a sense of ease with 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 knowing who I am, which I think other people come to maybe later or um, don't have to examine as deeply. So it's also it's very it's sobering, but it's also very steadying, in some ways. Even though
mhm,
I also think that the illusion of safety or you know, when people seek relationships because they're stable, stability is a better word.
Mhm.
The illusion of stability is not one that I've ever really bought into. So
Yep.
I'm a lot more comfortable when things move underneath my feet. I'm a lot more fluid. You know, like I don't have a problem pivoting because that's what I've been doing my whole life.
Yeah, yeah, that's I mean, hey, same here. Like I'm fond of telling people that I've had an interesting life. So that's something that we have in common where we've been a lot of people and we've done a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it's that the way I kind of have some people may accuse me of being cynical, but the way I see things is everything has an expiry date. Everything is in your life for a limited period of time. So
Mhm.
you kind of everything ends like jobs, situations, relationships, everything ends. So you just kind of have to be ready for the next thing, and you just have to kind of accept things when they do end.
Mhm.
So it's just
Mhm.
that illusion of stability is something that I'm very, very keenly aware that that is an illusion. There's no such thing
Mm.
as something that lasts forever.
There's a beauty in it too, though. You know, there's a
Mhm.
beauty in being able to recognize when things are ending or coming to an end and being able to acknowledge that and allowing yourself to have the ending and move on as opposed to fighting it all the time.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so what probably the most important question, what would you most like readers to take away from Beautiful Monster? And most importantly, where can people buy it?
Oh, sure. Well, I'd love for people to, I mean, honestly, it's a love letter to our community. Uh, but I don't really presume to know what they will take away from it. I think that's a gift that's intimately theirs. So I
Mhm.
would like for them to take away whatever serves them and whatever doesn't serve them to leave it, you know? And the book is available. Uh, it's available in many bookstores. It didn't hit a bunch of benchmarks that it needed to be in all bookstores, but
Mhm.
if it isn't at your bookstore, they probably will order it for you. You can also get it, you know, on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble and all those places. But I really prefer indie bookstores, so you can get it if they aren't carrying it, they'll order it for you. Um, but it's really available on a wide scale. So if you order it, they'll find it for you, and hopefully more bookstores will start carrying it. And actually, if you do order it from an indie bookstore that doesn't carry it quite yet, it helps the book because then the indie bookstore is like, oh, somebody wants it, so then it puts it on their radar. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is kind of getting the book on people's radar and
Mhm.
whatever, because I know if people are genderqueer and gender fluid and non-binary and trans that are listening, you know, we all know how hard it is uh, for us to be able to get our projects out there. So it's a labor
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
love, but it exists and you can definitely find it. And hopefully, I'm also trying to get it into a bunch of libraries. So, for example, if your library doesn't have it and you ask them to order it, that's also a way that can help you and it can help us. Um, yeah, but it should be if it isn't readily available, it should be orderable from any bookstore.
Awesome. Awesome. So we do have some concluding questions that we like to ask all of our guests. But first of all, is there anything that we missed about your memoir or your gender journey that you'd like to make sure that you say?
I would like to say that if anyone is out there who's going through a hard time, um, I would just like to cheer you on and say that even though sometimes it seems insurmountable, and even though sometimes it seems almost impossible, I feel like we are such magic, and it is so worth it to to live a life that you love and to live the life that was meant for you. Um, and if that's being trans or non-binary, I think that's I really do think we are a gift to 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 the world and that we
Hmm.
are changing the world. So I'd just like to cheer you on and say that I applaud your journey, and just know that there are those of us out there trying to make the world better for you.
I love that. Now, this next question is actually my favorite question
Okay.
because we talked a little earlier about how kind of hostile the world is to us and kind of how a lot of our stories are framed in tragedy and loss. But I think far more important is to share our joys. Can you share with us an experience that you've had with gender euphoria?
Oh my gosh, yes. So the book launch was in October, and because of the pandemic, I hadn't really bought. I started testosterone a little bit before the pandemic. So I came into the pandemic. I stepped into my apartment, still very female presenting or reading as female, and sort of walked out of the out of my apartment. You know, at some point when the pandemic was receding, uh, reading as male, and my body had kind of changed, and my clothes still fit. Like all of the sizing was sort of similar, but it just was odd, you know. And
Mm,
so for the launch, I treated myself to a couple, like a new pair of pants and like a new shirt and whatever. And there's just I can't express the feeling of looking in the mirror and just seeing myself, you
yeah.
know? It's just something, it's a very powerful, uh, sublime thing that I wish for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really amazing how much something as simple as just the right clothes can make you feel.
Totally.
Yeah, so no, I love that. And I mean, I also can relate to the whole I started the pandemic as one gender and I ended the pandemic as a different gender.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. We should make a video about that or something interesting. I mean, I feel like there's a whole, like, that was such a wild ride for me. Like,
Oh my
yeah,
God. Transitioning during the pandemic, not my first choice, but
yeah, yeah. And but wait, but I had, so not my first choice, but I also felt like being outside of the public eye and being able to experience myself without the lens of other people seeing me through my transition was really nice because it quieted all
yeah.
those like nay voices, like the naysayers in my mind. So I actually there was part of it that I was really grateful for.
Yeah, it made certain things more difficult and other things less difficult.
Yes.
So I know personally it actually sped up my access to medical transition
Yeah.
because all the doctors are doing everything over the phone and you can see way
Right.
more
You could get
people that way.
telehealth.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
So
been nothing short of a miracle.
hmm. So yeah, it's certainly been interesting.
Totally.
Not how I would have chosen to have done it, but we don't get to choose the times that we live in. So now, is there anything that you like to make sure that folks know about your perspective on gender and non-binary trans and or gender diverse issues?
Mm. I love all of it. More, please.
Yes. More, please.
More more transness, more gender diverseness, more non-binariness, more all of it. Just bring it on, folks. Let's do this.
Yes, I 100% agree. We need more of us out there. We need more trans stories, just more like
Yeah,
there literally
queerify
can't
the
be enough.
world. Like
Yes.
let's take over the
Yes,
like
world
I'm like
domination.
world domination totally.
Well, this has been a lovely chat. So, Miles Borrero has survived fronting a Latin rock band, riding horses competitively, acting on various stages across the United States, and nannying a 6-year-old. He's been Catholic, Jewish, and a frequent guest of At Krishna's House and has lived life as a boy, a girl, a woman, a man, and something in between. Now, a senior yoga teacher who leads retreats all over the world, Miles is passionate about dismantling the systems within ourselves that keep us small. He lives in New York with a sweetheart and their 2 adorable dogs. And there will be a link tree in the down below section if you're listening to this in the future. You can also, if you're watching this live on Twitch, that'll be in the chat somewhere. You can also follow Miles on Instagram and Facebook at MonkEyeMiles. So
Monkey
here is
Miles, but it's
Monkey
weird.
Miles.
It's like MONKI. Yeah.
Okay, monkey. Oh, I get it. So here is this week's Clatter query that you, our audience, can answer on our social media platforms.
What beautiful monster are you?
Ooh. I wish we had more time to do a deep dive on cryptozoology.
Oh, I don't even know what that is. So I wish we had more time to do that.
Oh my God.
Too.
It's basically, it's a fancy scientific word for made up monsters, like, like
Oh
the
my gosh,
Sasquatch
love
and
it.
the Loch Ness Monster and stuff like that.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Please send pictures, send drawings, send just words, whatever you want.
Oh my God.
I want it all.
All right, so coming soon. So next week's guest will be a surprise because we haven't booked one yet. So. But yeah, stay tuned. Make sure you're following Genderful Podcast on socials. Also make sure you're following GenderMeowster. You can also follow me if you want. We're looking forward to get back in the swing of things after the winter break. So for any community updates, I'll leave that to producer Mirami to go over that. We'd also like to thank all of our supporters on Patreon. So thank you to Holly Blash, Winter Vespers, Loch Ness Gamer, Justin Baker Rojas, Yaisio, Ray of Swords, Mirami, The Hessian, and Trans Capybara. So thanks again for everyone who tuned in, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much, Miranda.
Genderful would like to thank our guests for being on this podcast. If you'd like to catch us live, join us on Mondays on twitch.tv/GenderMeowster. Show notes will appear in the edited versions of the show on Fridays on both YouTube and podcasting platforms.
If you have a question you'd like the host to answer or are gender diverse and would like to request an interview, please send an email to genderfulpodcast@gmail.com or sign up via the website at genderfulpodcast.com.
As a gender diverse community, the Clouder wants to assure our listeners that we are prepared to moderate our spaces. We will get positive and negative feedback on these shows and topics, and we have a moderation team on our channels, socials, and Discord server ready to deal with this.
Please join our Discord server at discord.gg/meowster to meet the community and get a regular digest of solidarity resources. You can also support us with subscriptions on Patreon, following and reviewing us on your favorite podcasting platform, or engaging with our posts and content on social media at GenderfulPod and at GenderMeowster.
You could take a few minutes to rate the show. We will post any 5-star reviews on our socials, so get creative. Mention a special interest of your own, a project you're working on, or even say hi to your comfort person in your review. What power!
This show is made possible by volunteers, tips, and subscriptions. Shout out to the folks helping us coordinate guests, edit the podcast, moderate the live chat, and post on our socials.
Here's our artist credit. Genderful is hosted by Miranda Katita and GenderMeowster. Genderful's pre-show is wrangled by JuiceTex. Genderful's live stream is produced by Mirami. Genderful is edited and mixed by Transgriffin and FreeRangeMegs. Genderful's promos and thumbnail graphic are designed by Transgriffin. Genderful's social media is managed by Kainsey. Genderful's theme song is called Hope by FreeRangeMegs, also known as Soma. The current GenderMeowster logo was designed by Siptopia. Genderful is the intellectual property of GenderMeowster. All rights reserved. Trans rights are human rights. That's right.